Okay, everyone. So I'm going to talk about separation as well as the beginning of divorce in our textbook. So, just to get us started, in 2013, 68% of Americans age 18 and older said that divorce is morally acceptable, and this is up from only 59% in 2001. And so you can imagine prior to 2001, particularly if we think back to the 50s, 60s, that even more adults over age 18 would find that divorce is morally acceptable, even less adults. So we've definitely seen a change in terms of the stigma around divorce. On average, first marriages that end in divorce last about 8 years. And after a divorce, 82% of custodial parents are mothers, and that has maintained since about 1994. So it's very typical that custodial parents are mothers. Okay, so prior to divorce, many individuals separate, and it's important to distinguish the different kinds of separation that couples may experience. So it can be a temporary timeout during which partners deliberate about continuing the marriage. And with this sort of trial separation, one person may move out of the home or they may continue to live together but are doing a trial separation. Sometimes these happen in the course of therapy or couples therapy. But many times, if you start to separate, you might not get back together. Separation can also be a permanent arrangement if couples' religious beliefs don't allow divorce. So instead of getting a divorce, you're still legally married, but you have a permanent separation. And then legal separation is a temporary period of living apart that many states require before granting a divorce. So in many states, you have to document that you have been legally separated and living in separate residences for a period of time. And that varies from state to state. So separation, just like divorce, is a process and not just something that occurs. So during the pre-separation phase, this is where couples experience gradual emotional alienation. The financial costs of ending a marriage are important considerations, particularly if they have children, but they're often less important than the emotional and psychological disadvantages of staying in an unhealthy marriage. During the early separation phase, besides feeling ambivalent about leaving a marriage, the couple is thinking about many things, important things as well as trivial things, such as how are you going to do the grocery shopping, or who's going to take over, or having to take over tasks that one partner did. And also big things such as paying bills, splitting old and new expenses. In mid-separation, the pressures of maintaining two households and meeting the children's emotional and physical needs if you have children intensifies and results in increased stress. Because of the problems with the increased stress and feeling guilty over breaking up a family, a couple may experience a pseudo reconciliation and move back in together, but unfortunately, rarely does that work out. Once a couple decides to separate, even if they move back in together for a period, it's not uncommon for a couple to go ahead and continue to separate or to separate again. Late separation is when you start to learn how to be a single again. You're doing all the housework, home maintenance, etc., and you have to help children deal with the anxiety, anger, confusion, and sadness about the separation. So, not all separations end in divorce. Approximately 10% of couples who have separated do reconcile. So, again, that's a small amount of the couples who do separate, but 10% do reconcile. And about 6% of couples never actually make the divorce final. So, you know, they say they're getting a divorce, and it could go on for years and years without an actual legal divorce occurring. And that, again, that's rare, only 6% of couples. So moving into talking about divorce, I mentioned this in our lecture on Monday, but we do see that basically the trend is that there is less divorce than previous. So you can see divorces spiked. In the 60s and 70s, and then it plateaued a bit, and then it started dropping in about 1995. And we are continuing the downward trend. So it'll be interesting to see where divorce trends go now that the economy is recovering, because we do know, as you'll see later, people are less likely to divorce in a time where the economy is not as strong, because they feel like they can't take the financial hit. So like separation, divorce is a process as well, and I alluded to this on Monday. So these are Bohannon's 6 stations of divorce. That's what they're called. So these have been cited a number of times. And basically, it gets at the different aspects of divorce, or the different ways in which divorce touches an individual, couple, and family's lives. So first is the emotional divorce, and this usually begins before any legal steps are actually starting to happen. So in the beginning phase, spouses may feel disillusioned but hope the marriage will continue. During the middle phase, they start to get hurt, angry, and then unhappy, or a partner begins evaluating the rewards and costs of leaving the marriage. And in the end phase of this emotional process, one of the partners stops caring and detaches emotionally from the other. And for some, apathy and indifference replace loving, intimate feelings that were once there. And if you remember from the video of Dr. Afifi talking about how children are affected by divorce, is that sometimes people fight during a divorce and through a divorce and even into remarriage, not because they hate each other or are angry, but because they still have a lot of unresolved feelings, even love and connection, and even hurt that they need to continue to deal with. So the legal divorce is the actual formal dissolution of the marriage. Because divorce is an adversarial procedure, which we've touched on, during which each partner's attorney tries to maintain the upper hand, the process is rarely trouble-free. So we do have to think of things called alimony and child support, as well as the legal expenses that are part of the legal divorce. The economic divorce involves who should pay past debts, property taxes, new expenses, and basically financial issues and the conflict that may come about often continues long after legal questions have been settled. The co-parental divorce is really about agreements and disagreements about legal responsibility and financial support of the children, as well as how parents are going to make decisions about parenting, living arrangements, supporting a child, discipline, differences, etc. The community divorce is when they inform friends, families, teachers, and others that the partners are no longer together. Relationships between grandparents and grandchildren often continue, but in-law relationships for the parents, you may sever ties, and we mentioned this on Monday as well. In the psychic part of the divorce, this is where partners separate from each other emotionally and establish separate lives. So this is very similar to the emotional divorce, but during the psychic divorce, this is where you may experience mourning for the loss of the marriage, and where you may experience some mental health issues and stress as well. So this image, the divorce went well, I got 60% of his Facebook friends, is really talking about the social divorce and how it affects how couples deal with that. So the legal divorce, like I mentioned, uh, talks about the legal process as well as alimony and child support, which we touched on Wednesday. I'd like everyone to watch the Business of Divorce video, the first one linked here, right here. It's also linked on the Wednesday lecture page. It has some really great things to make us think a little bit more nuanced about how divorce and family court processes are how they affect individuals and families. So the other thing that we need to cover is why people divorce. And there are three interrelated reasons that, again, sort of taking the book's perspective, are touching on macro level or social reasons, demographic variables, as well as micro level or interpersonal reasons. And again, these are all interrelated. So in terms of macro reasons, so all states now have no-fault divorce, and when this became legal, we really saw an increase in divorce rates. Couples now can simply state irreconcilable differences or incompatibility as a valid reason for divorce. And previously, you had to blame or indicate fault or wrongdoing, sometimes as a result of adultery, desertion, or physical and mental cruelty. So now with no fault divorce, and this is going to be brought up in the Business of Divorce video, this definitely affected the availability of divorce. It makes it more accessible and also relatively inexpensive in some ways, depending if the divorce involves children or not. The economy also impacts divorce. Some studies show that economic hardships actually increase the risk of divorce, but on the other hand, economic hardship can actually reduce the occurrence of divorce because it's too expensive to live separately. A spouse may have lost health benefits, and the divorce itself can be expensive, again, particularly if there are children involved. And we also know that the economy affects the quality of a marriage, therefore that could then increase the likelihood of divorce or decrease as well. Military service does play a role in divorce. You'll see later in the slides, I'm going to pop to it right now on the end. If you are interested in military families, there's some really great work being done in terms of focusing on military families and increasing in order to decrease divorce rates in the military. For instance, women in the military have higher rates of divorce than men serving in the military. So this is something that you may want to look into. Again, those slides are at the end of the lecture. So military service, especially during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, is believed to have increased divorce rates because extended duty and re-employments have been difficult on soldiers and their families. Divorce rates among male enlistees, but not officers, have gradually increased, but the rate among female soldiers has surged. And by mid-2007, female soldiers in the U.S. Army were filing for divorce at a rate 3 times higher than that of their male counterparts in the U.S. Army. Cultural values and social integration also play a role. So this has to do with acceptance of divorce and the decrease of stigma. And many social scientists maintain that greater acceptance of divorce is due to many Americans emphasizing individual happiness over family commitments. Again, this was brought up in the video by Dr. Afifi, where she talked about how children sometimes think that being unhappy is not a good enough reason for a divorce, that the family commitment and the commitment to the marriage and the family may be seen as something that should be valued higher than it is. And in terms of technology, Basically, this has made divorce more accessible. So you can file online for divorce, you can save time and money, you can find access to lawyers and ratings, etc. So these are some of the ways that some of the things that increase or play a role, macro level role in divorce. Okay, so there's all kinds of information and research around demographic variables and divorce. So, as I mentioned, if parents of one or both partners in a marriage were divorced when their children were young, the children themselves are more likely to divorce after they marry. Children of divorced parents are often less willing than those whose parents haven't divorced to tolerate unhappy marriages. And, I've already talked about that in class previously. Age at marriage also, um, it the younger early marriage, especially before 18, is one of the strongest predictors of divorce. We talked about this when we talked about marriage. Those who delay marriage until their 20s are usually more mature than teens and better able to handle challenges of married life. And again, as we see, like a marriage over age of 24 has been shown to be if you marry over the age of 24, you're less likely to get divorced than if you marry under that. Premarital childbearing is related to women who conceive or give birth to a child before marriage, so experience premarital childbearing, do have higher divorce rates than women who conceive or have a child after marriage. And again, divorce is especially likely among adolescent parents who lack education income to maintain a stable life. Couples who live together do have a higher chance of divorce if they marry, but the risk of divorce is highest among those who engage in serial cohabitation by living with different partners over time. Cohabitants tend to be more accepting of divorce, less committed to marriage, and have fewer skills in coping with marital problems. And again, if we look at the cohabitation literature like we did earlier in the semester, we still have the age difference that plays a role, as well as the commitment going into cohabitation that plays a role as well in terms of reducing or increasing the likelihood of divorce. Women are twice as likely as men to initiate a divorce, and primarily social scientists believe that this is because husbands tend to not be as responsive to relationship problems. And women are more responsive and take more ownership on the relationship problems that may exist in a relationship. Across all age groups, women in unhappy marriages are more likely to get a divorce if they can support themselves. However, holding joint assets such as savings and stocks decrease many unhappy wives' likelihood of seeking a divorce because they expect that they'll have a lower standard of living. So finances basically and economic security definitely play a role in whether a woman does initiate a divorce. One of the most consistent research findings in terms of population size and marriage rates are that blacks are more likely to divorce than are people in any other racial ethnic group, and Asian women in particular have the lowest divorce rates. But it is very important to understand that race and ethnicity do not cause divorce. Divorce is more prevalent among African Americans because of a combination of things that include higher rates of teenage premarital pregnancy, younger age at marriage, presence of children from previous relationships, increased likelihood of serial cohabitation, as well as macro level variables of poverty, financial strain, male unemployment, and incarceration. And low Asian divorce rates also reflect a combination of variables. In particular, traditional values that encourage staying married even if there is domestic violence. In terms of social class, divorce rates are lowest among those with a college degree and highest for those with some college, whereas those with a high school education or less have divorce rates that fall between the other two groups. So basically, when I say some college have the highest, those are individuals who have a 2-year program or incomplete or do not complete a 4-year program. Those individuals have the highest rates in terms of looking at education. In 2009, for example, among divorced women aged 25 and older, 16% had a college degree compared with 26% of high school graduates and 39% had some college. And people with college degrees don't have lower divorce rates because they're smarter. Rather, obtaining a college degree postpones marriage, with the result that college graduates are often more mature and able to deal with personal crises when they marry. They have higher incomes, better health care, both of which reduce financial stress. And then there are also characteristics associated with completing college, such as persistence, dependability, responsibility, that would also increase the likelihood of having a stable marriage. So whenever we think about these demographic variables in predicting divorce or being associated with things like cohabitation, early pregnancy, whatever we're looking at, you really need to understand the nuances about why particular demographic categories or situations are related to a particular finding. It's typically much more complicated than just saying that those with some college are more likely to get divorced. That's not a complete understanding of the relationship between education and divorce, for example. So strong religious beliefs and behavior can either strengthen or weaken a marriage. Compared with their less religious counterparts, the risk of divorce is much lower among couples that are religiously homogamous. And that means that they belong to the same faith or denomination, that they attend the same religious services regularly and have similar gender ideologies about women and men's roles at home. On the other hand, the likelihood of divorce is high if partners belong to different faiths, if one partner attends services more than the other, and if one partner is theologically more conservative than the other. So, religion plays a role, but again, it's nuanced. So here, this is just looking at among racial and ethnic groups, rates of first divorce with women 18 and older. So you can see that, that the rate is highest for blacks, then Hispanics, whites, and then Asian is the lowest. So there are also a ton of micro-level reasons for divorce, and these are sort of personal reasons why people cite that they get divorced. So basically, people have unrealistic expectations about marriage that are fueled by television shows and movies, and just our general idea of what a marriage will look like. And then you get into marriage and realize it's not all hunky-dory, and that marriage is actually a lot of work. A study of newlyweds found that 19% of the women and 14% of the men who had premarital doubts prior to marriage, premarital doubts, were divorced 4 years later. So if you have doubts prior to getting married, you might want to think about whether you want to go through with that, because individuals who do have those doubts are more likely to get divorced. Financial problems and disagreements are a stronger predictor of divorce than arguments about other issues such as household tasks, spending time together, etc. A national study of ex-spouses found that 42% of women and 9% of men said that verbal, physical, or emotional abuse was the most significant reason for divorce. Extramarital affairs are one of the top reasons for divorce. The cheater is almost always repentant or sorry or apologizes, but infidelity often does crumble a relationship. Communication problems, such as chronic complaining, criticizing, etc., and the inability to resolve conflict leads to marital dissatisfaction and then to divorce for some people. A strong predictor of divorce is negative interaction before the couple marries. Substance abuse can lead to divorce because the user can focus on obtaining and consuming a drug and neglects the marriage and family. And continuous disagreements about how to raise and discipline children can increase marital dissatisfaction and also trigger a divorce. So this next chart shows some differences between ex-husbands and ex-wives in what they cite as reasons for divorce. And you'll see here that women, the green bars, are all higher for every area except for financial problems. And this is the only area where men were more likely to cite financial problems as a reason for divorce than women. Every other women are more likely to cite it than men. Okay, so that wraps up the first part of the chapter on separation and divorce, and we will talk about the Olson circumplex model on Wednesday, as well as start talking about remarriage.